Welcome to another Ask an Expert session. The goal for today's webinar is to give you an overview of the Access category. This is our agenda for today. We're just going to go through the Access category. What is it? What does it do? And then all the different submenus that live under the Access category. The Access category is a very powerful section in our system. And the reason for that is this is where we maintain security for each of the access groups. Within your system, you will have different variations of access groups. This is where we control if an employee can access only a time clock, or if an employee also is given access to the mobile app, or if we want the employees to have access to the web, or this is where we can restrict employees, where we can say, no, this particular group only has access to the time clock, no mobile, no web access. This is where we define time zones. If your organization is within different time zones, this is where we drive what time zone those punches are going to come in. We also define if that location observes daylight savings time, yes or no. This is where we would turn that on or off. This is where we define if an employee can edit his or her timesheet. This is where we can decide what pay codes if employees are able to edit a timesheet. This is where we can say, all right, this employees are able to see regular pay code. They can request vacation, they can request sick time, or you can restrict the pay codes that the employees have access to. This is where you can decide which timesheet format your employees will have access to view. So in our system, we have two different timesheets formats. There is the detail and the hourly. So if you have different groups of employees that you want them to use different or report hours differently, then this is where you can define the format of that timesheet. What else do we have on here? Work group allocations. So for those clients who have employees who maybe they work at multiple locations, and every time they clock in at a different location, they need to allocate their hours. This is where you can also fine tune the departments that they're able to see or the locations that they're able to see. That way, those employees are not seeing all the departments for the entire organization, right? That's what the access category will do. So just want to reiterate, the access category maintains security access for each of your access groups. Within our system, we have three types of access groups. There's employee, there's supervisor, and there is an administrator access group. And within those, you have different variations. So the first thing that we're going to tackle is the page menu. So the page menu, and here's the screen of that. This is where you decide, all right, for my supervisor access groups, which page menus do I want them to see? And then once I decide what those menus will be, I can decide which sub-pages they're able to see. As you're fine-tuning your access groups, this is where you can decide what your users can or cannot see. So let's log into the system really quick. Here we are. Here's your page menu page that I was referring to. Here's your category. In our Nova Time system, the menus here to the left-hand side, those are our categories. So that's what that refers to. So if you want your supervisors to be able to see the attendance category, but maybe you don't want them to see the preference category, this is where you can place a check mark or uncheck those items that you want them to see or not see. Now, these are the other sub-menu categories. So here's my overview tab. Here's my summary tab. Now, attendance summary. If I want my user to be able to see that overview page, this is the overview page. Then on the page menu, I would place a check mark, and hey, now that if it's an administrator or a supervisor, then he or she would actually have access to that. Here's my category, and here's that submenu. So that lives under the page menu. Whenever you're granting access to any of these categories or any of the submenus, there's a second step that you need to do. First, we're here under page menu, and once we have defined what those categories will be, the next thing is you decide, I've given this administrator access to the attendance tab, or maybe it's a supervisor. So you can decide, all right, here's the attendance tab, and these are all the submenus that I've given them access to. Do I only want them to have read-only access? Do I want them to only have full access? So if they only have read-only access, then they're only able to look at information, but they're not able to make any edits or corrections or any adjustments. So the page access is really important. So you start out with page menu because this defines the categories and the submenus that they see. And then step 2 of that will be defining the type of access for each of the different access groups. So let's bring back the slide. So that's your page menu. This is your page access. And as mentioned, these are the only options you have: not allowed, read only, or full access. What else lives under the access category? The group page lives there. And the nice thing about the group page is, as I mentioned earlier, if you have an employee who is working in different projects or in different locations, this is where you can fine-tune the system and say, hey, this user should only have access to 4 departments or 3 locations or 10 locations. So this is where you can limit the number of work groups a specific access group has access to. The next thing that we have on here is the EWS login. So the EWS login is completely configurable. Let me show you. So on the screen that you're looking at right now, you're able to see that for this particular employee, they're able to punch, they're able to transfer, and this particular client requires the employees to daily submit their time. So this landing page is completely configurable, and it's configurable by access group. So on the left-hand side, you can see that I have all my employee access groups. I have all my administrators. So each employee access group can have a different experience when they log into the system. You can restrict them from seeing that punch and transfer, but then they can have access to log into the web. Or you can just restrict them to punch and log into the web services page and remove transfer. So all of that lives under the access category advanced tab, EWS login, and for each of your access group, you can define what that landing page will look like. Okay, let's pull up that slide. Templates. So the templates are really important because these are the ones that are published whenever your employees go to request time off. So, or whenever a supervisor is submitting a request on behalf of an employee. So if you're a new client and you're still working and building your system, this is where your consultant or you can go in and add those templates that you want specific access groups to see. And on this example, so this is for this particular access group, they're going to be able to see comp time, holiday, vacation, sick time. And if you need to add any, this is where you can add those. If you need to remove one that is not applicable to an access group, then just exit out and make sure to save and post the item across the board. So, and then the screen below that you see on here, this is what your employees would see. And it goes back to whatever they're eligible for, whatever templates you've created here, then that's what the employee will see when he or she goes to request time off. So depending on where your employees go to request time off, if they use the icon on the dashboard, then this is what they're going to see. If they click on that arrow on the dashboard that brings them to the request page, then this is what they're going to see. All those templates that you see there, they're modified under access templates and per each of your access groups. Let's move on forward. So the next category that we're going to focus on is the advanced page, but we're going to focus under this one here where it says timesheet, pay codes, and pay periods. So this is where you're going to spend the most amount of time. This is where per each of your access groups, you can define what pay codes can those employees see. You can also, if you want those employees to see specific exceptions, this is where those are going to be modified. If they're using the expense module, if a particular group of employees is always going to be allocating hours for XYZ, this is where you can define what those expense types they will have access to see. And here's that EWS login that we talked about earlier. But the timesheet one is the one where you're going to spend the most amount of time. This is where for each of your employees, you can set it up where here's your timesheet approval. So this will allow your employees to, if they have access to edit their timesheet, you can actually set up a rule in the system that says if this employee has missing punches and they have access to edit their timesheet at the end of the pay period, they can't submit it if there's a missing punch. So this is where you can set up those rules where it says you have a missing punch, you have to fix it before you submit it, and the employee has to go back and fix it or make the appropriate corrections. What else lives here? The timesheet submission. So this is where you can define whenever an employee selects that submit button, if a message will display. For example, we have some clients have a message display that says, hey, I attest that the hours submitted are correct. I've taken all my meal breaks. So anytime the employee selects to submit, that message appears. They say okay, and that's the electronic signature for that employee. So this is where you can actually have a message display whenever the submit button is pressed. What else lives on your preferences? Let me actually log into the system and show you. So we are under advanced, and here we're going to go. Let's go under the employee access group. All right, so here's your timesheet approval. This is where you can say if that employee has access to edit their timesheets, but if there's a missing punch, they're not able to submit that timesheet. Here's that timesheet message that I was talking about. I certify that the timesheet is correct. So if you place a check mark on here, then that's going to appear whenever those employees submit that timesheet. Timesheet preferences. This is where you can have the employee show the accruals in the detail page, or you can define what the employee is able to view. There's also something on here that if your employees make any edits to a timesheet, they must include a note. So this is where you can set up those rules as well. And the timesheet column. So this one is really important. If you have a group of employees that are not allocating hours to different locations or different departments, then they don't need to see those columns. And so this is where you can say, hey, this specific group, they only need to see in time, they only need to see out time, they only need to see regular hours and total hours. That's it. And this is where you can define it. So like, for example, if they do not need to allocate hours to department or division, you move it over to the left, you save it, and you publish out that change. When you click on publish, that's a global change across the board. But that's how easy it is for you to modify columns. Or if you know that this particular group, they need to have task on there, they also need to have, let's say, department again. Task, department, that's where that lives. You can save that. And now when I publish that out, that timesheet for that employee will have task and department. This is also where you can decide what the order of each of these items will look like. For example, if we don't want in modified, we don't want the expression codes, click on that, remove it, click on it, remove it. And if we need to change the order of things, maybe we want daily to be after the weekly, and it's just an example. And this is where you can decide, click on that up arrow to change the order or bring it back down. So that's the timesheet column. The cleaner it is for your employees, the easier it is for them to review their timesheets. So if they have too much information that they don't need, please make sure that you update them per each of your access groups, and everything that is showing under selected and the order that they display on here, that's exactly how that timesheet will display. Always make sure that you save your changes, and if you want to roll it out to those employees, always make sure that you click publish, and that will make sure that the timesheet changes or the new format is changed across the board. Okay, summary columns. So these are the summary columns that appear at the bottom of the timesheet. So here's a timesheet. Let me retrieve this timesheet here. So here's my timesheet for Gladys, and here's the timesheet summary. So the timesheet summary and the columns that appear on here, those are completely configurable. What else is configurable? The accrual summary. So in that other page that we're in, we can actually decide, all right, what do we want our employees to see? Do we just want them to see the pay code? Do we want them to see the accruals and use? Or maybe we just want them to see pay codes and available balances and any notes that are on there. And you can completely hide all these other columns. So that's going to happen under the advanced. And here's your timesheet column. And then here is your timesheet accrual columns, and then that's where you can decide. I only want them to see the pay code. I only want them to see the available accrual now, and maybe note. And that's how you can configure that. And this is how you can configure the summary columns. And let's see, I think we have one last thing here. In the hourly timesheet, if you needed to customize the hourly timesheet, this is where that would be done. And then I do want to highlight, if anyone who is on the call has the NT8000. This is where you can modify the view of that timesheet on the time clock. Okay, let's see what else we have on our slide for today. Oh, the dashboard. So this one is going to be really important. As your employees log into the system, so I'm going to click on my blue silhouette, and I'm going to go to myself. Right now for this view, or this particular employee, when they log into the system, they're seeing the system in the card view. Also, they have access to all these gadgets. So as you can see, they have access to all the possible gadgets. Click on the drop-down arrow. I'm going to click on settings, and on here, I'm going to change this to icon view. I'm going to save it. I'm going to go back to my dashboard. And so now that's that same employee, Alice, but now the view that you see on here is the icon view. So as an administrator, you're able to decide what view your employees will be able to. Will they have the icon view? Will they have the card view? And what else? You can decide if your employees will be able to select gadgets or hide gadgets themselves, or you can completely restrict this for that employee. Maybe they don't need to see the leave shared calendar. Maybe they don't need to see schedules. So you can grant your employees access to configure their own dashboard. And as you can see, the gadgets still live in the background, but at least the employee can configure their dashboard to what they think they need. So let me show you, as an administrator, can define what those dashboards will look like and how you can grant your employees access to be able to edit their views or restrict that access. So we're going to go back to the dashboard. Again, that lives under the advanced page. So for each of your access groups, this is where you can say, for my employee group number 1, I want them to see approaching hours. I want them to see the clock. I want them to see exceptions. And then we don't have a leave share calendar maybe, or you can click on it, move it to the left. And so now this is all that employee is going to see. What else can you do on here? If you want timesheets to be the first gadget, or maybe clock, this is how you can change the order of how things appear. And then from the available to selected, this is how I can make a gadget available for a particular user. So if they're going to be requesting time off, then we can move time off over to the right. So this is how you can define what those gadgets will be that particular access group will have access to. This is where you can decide, what view will my users have access? Do I want them to have the icon view, or do I want them to have the card view? Do I want them to configure their dashboard? And the configuration of the dashboard is just giving the employee access to change their views or hide gadgets. That's what that's doing. These are some options that you have. And as soon as you select save, then all those changes will be pushed out to your employees. Just give your employees the gadgets that they need. If you know that you have an access group for your part-time employees and they don't have access to requesting leave time, they don't have access to punch in and out, then get rid of those gadgets and then just give them what they need, which is maybe timesheets, or they're able to message their managers. So we're going to proceed. The next tab that we have is the mobile application. For each of your access groups, you're able to decide which groups will have access to that mobile application. So on here, there's a check mark and it says allow mobile access. This is also where you decide the order of how the different columns will appear on the mobile application. This is where you enable the GPS tracking, where you can set up a limit that says, hey, an employee must be half a mile from our office in order for that employee to clock in and out. This is where you set up those parameters. Let's bring back the slides. I know that was a lot of information, but it was important to go over the access category so that you as an administrator can get comfortable with it, because that's the area that will drive the employee's experience. That's the area that drives the employee's security access. So if you're some administrator and you're new to using our system, and if you're not too comfortable with the changes that you're going to make, just make sure that you talk to your consultant about it or reach out to our support team. On our slides for today, I did provide the information to our support team. So if you have any software questions, you select option 5 and then you can talk to a representative. If you're emailing our support team, this is the required information